What a Plant Knows, a Field Guide to the Senses. This is a book by Daniel Chamovitz, who is the director for the Manna Center for Plant Biosciences in Tel Aviv. We're doing Chapter 2, What Plants Smell. And plants can smell. They produce odors, no surprise there, but it turns out they also sense their own and their neighbors' odors, and they sometimes can even differentiate between the odors of one plant and another plant. This communication influences plant physiology, and that effectively is the act of smelling. What is the sense of smell? If you were to look in a dictionary for a typical definition, you would likely see something along the lines of ability to perceive odor or scent through stimuli affecting the olfactory nerves. And this is the definition for an animal, obviously. The olfactory nerves connect the nose to the brain, and the nose cells absorb airborne chemicals and scents and tell the brain about it. There are many different receptor types. Sometimes we may not even be conscious of the chemicals that we are absorbing in our nose and the brain is figuring out. Other times, of course, we do smell. We are aware that we're smelling something. Well, there's obviously no nervous system in plants, but we only have to tweak the definition a little bit to nevertheless account for the plant's ability to smell. They have the ability to perceive and react to odor or scent, and that does then constitute smelling on some levels. One of the first examples of people realizing that plants had an ability to sense the chemicals around them and react to that was occurred in a two-step situation starting in the early 1900s. Farmers had gotten in the habit of using kerosene heaters to speed up citrus fruit ripening. They would put their green fruits in a shed, an enclosed shed with these heaters, and turn the heaters on, and presto chango, the fruits would begin ripening. And logically enough, everybody assumed that it was because they had gotten warmer that helped with the ripening. However, at some point in time, they switched to electric heaters, and to everybody's surprise, there was no ripening response, even though the fruits were good and warm. Well, it turns out that kerosene had a small amount of ethylene in it, which is a small molecule gas, and it turns out to be a plant hormone and responsible for the ripening response. And it also turns out to be the same principle as putting, a banana in a bag with unripe fruit, or a ripe fruit and an unripe fruit together. The unripe fruit responds by ripening. Here you can see a couple ways of looking at the molecule ethylene. It is 2 carbons and 4 hydrogens. On the upper right, the black represents carbon with a double bond between the 2 carbons, and white is the hydrogen. It is a plant hormone, a phytohormone, phyto meaning plant, and hormones are signal molecules that are in low concentrations, but it cause enormous responses by their presence, and they're responsible for pretty much everything that happens in a plant. The shape, the growth, flowering time, leaf drop time, fruit development. Much is driven by hormones in plants. There are many different kinds. Ethylene was one of the first identified, and it's now known that essentially all ripening fruits emit ethylene, and so that unripe fruit in that bag with the ripe one is smelling the ethylene and deciding to ripen. And why ripening fruit should emit ethylene? It's been determined that essentially all fruits show a dramatic increase in ethylene production when they do begin to ripen, and that is released around them and causes other fruit around them to release. So think of an apple tree. When they pretty much all get ripe at the same time, you have a uniformly ripened crop because of this, and it is thought in an ecological sense that makes it more likely to attract animals that are going to aid in dispersal. And don't forget, the reason that those apple trees are producing apples is it's not for us, it's for to disperse their seeds. So it's in their best interest, quote unquote, to do the best job they can to get those seeds dispersed. Okay, another example of smelling. Do you remember Dodder cuscuta? We saw this plant when we talked about parasitic plants, and also when with the Convolvulaceae. Looks like orange silly string sprayed all over an elderberry bush there. Well, it turns out that these plants can smell. After germination, that little daughter has to quickly find a host plant and tap into the phloem, or it's not going to live. And so the way this is accomplished by the shoot spirals in around and detecting gases and the atmosphere as it goes, sort of like, you know, if you're in the dark looking for the light switch, you're waving your hand around until you hit something that you can then figure out where you are. When it smells a plant, it moves in that direction, excuse me, and then finds a leaf, moves to the stem, taps into the stem, and it's off and running. Some daughter Cuscuta species, given the choice between two plants, even have preferred species. So you've got a tomato on one side and a wheat plant on the other. They don't like wheat as much as tomato, and so they will wave away from one and toward the other. Here is a video. If you look, the little orange thread in the left side edge of the pot is the daughter shoot that is looking for something to tap into. See there, it's waving back and forth, and fairly quickly it's been able to realize there's a tomato plant near it, and as it elongates, it's waving more and more toward that tomato, and then eventually finds the stem and wraps around, and home free. It's time to tap into the phloem. Okay, another example of plants emitting signals and smelling them are plants that are being predated on, whether it's an animal or a mammal or insect that's chewing on them. Plants often respond by production of compounds that don't taste so good, tannins and phenolics and other unpleasant tasting compounds. And the first example, or sort of the first documented suggestion of this was people observed that in a bunch of willows, those that were being attacked by tent caterpillars had willows near them that were not being eaten nearly as much, and it amounted to, they realized that the plants were able to detect the herbivory in the plants next to them and elevate their levels of the bad tasting things before the caterpillars got to them. So they were able to sense that their neighbors were being attacked. Another example, a little bit more scientifically rigorous, were tree seedlings put in airtight containers that have like 15 tree seedlings that were torn in half and 15 that were not. They're all left in there together for a couple days, and then later, 2 days later, their leaves are analyzed for the amount of phenolics and unpalatable compounds they produced, and sure enough, both the damaged and the undamaged trees showed large increases in those chemicals. So the undamaged plants had been able to detect that that the damaged plants were in trouble and that they should sort of arm themselves. And of course, there were controls done with plants that weren't torn to show that if they weren't in the presence of a torn plant, then they didn't produce those chemicals, but they had gone through all the other process of being put in the containers and so on. So are they intentionally communicating? Well, no. However, they are communicating, and what it amounts to is the plants that are actually being parasitized, herbivorized, are attempting to communicate with their own leaves, their own other leaves on the same plant, and let them know that, you know, we're under attack here, we need to get serious. And nearby plants are essentially eavesdropping. And they figured this out by some clever studies. They would have an insect chew on a leaf, and then they would cover that leaf with a plastic bag so that whatever gases it was giving off, anything around it could not detect. And sure enough, the leaves on the same plant and adjacent plants did not have the response that they do if the baggie was not there. But then if the air in the baggie, if they used a little bitty fan like you would use to cool a hard drive in a computer, used to direct where the air was wafting out of the baggie, the leaves that were receiving that air then would respond. So they were able to show that it was the chemicals the leaf was releasing. and it was just whatever leaves detected it, whether it was on the actual plant or on a nearby plant, were responding. And they also, in the same manner, were able to show that it was not an internal response that causes plants to have the one leaf chewed and all of the plant then has a response to that chewing. So the vascular system is not involved. The volatile emission is considered more efficient, and you can see that in this diagram, that on plant A on the left, all of these little red leaves with the bug on them represent the chewed leaf. So plant A is using the volatile gaseous method to alarm nearby leaves that its herbivory is going on, and sure enough, the closest leaves are the most aware. The middle plant, B, is using a vascular system to alarm the rest of the plants, and so the only other leaf that finds out about the herbivory is the one very close to the leaf being chewed on, whereas there are some other leaves that are physically close to that leaf, but they're not close as far as the vascular system, that are not getting the signal. Or sort of the reverse of B is, enough time has gone by that the signal has gone extensively through the vascular system, and now leaves that are quite some distance away from the parasitized leaf are responding with production of these chemicals, which are fairly costly to produce. And so the most economic model for the plant is the volatile emissions, not vascular. And which does bring up the fact there's no Kyoto Protocol for plants. We always have known for a very long time that they produce carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, but now it's known that they produce a host of other chemicals: phenylpropanoids, benzenoids, fatty acids, methanol, acetone, formaldehyde, things that would probably be regulated by the EPA could it be done. So responding to odor information essentially is the equivalent of smell. It's the responding to a volatile chemical, the signal is converted to a physiological response, and that is how plants smell, and it is all part of being adapted to being immobile. If you're going to be rooted in the same spot your entire life, things are going to come and try and attack you, and this is just one of the mechanisms that has evolved to protect plants from things that want to eat them. And that concludes Chapter 2 of What Plants Know.